Thanks for joining us this morning for our virtual tour at the Timken. We're excited to have you with us this morning, and we'll just wait a couple minutes while other people are joining, and we'll get started at 11. All right, so it's 11 now. So hello everyone and welcome to today's tour. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. If everyone could please keep themselves muted throughout the presentation, that would be greatly appreciated. If you have any questions, you're able to use the Zoom chat function to leave any of those questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. And if you're joining us from Facebook, you're able to use the Facebook comment section to leave any comments or questions down there, and we will also get to those at the end of the tour. Lastly, the tour is being streamed live on our Facebook page, and those streams are available to watch at any time. So they're recorded, and so if you'd like to view any of our previous lectures, those are available at any time. So without further ado, we have our docent Eleanor today presenting on the masterpieces of the National Gallery. So thanks, Eleanor, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good morning. In December 1936, Andrew W. Mellon donated to the nation his priceless art collection and a projected 8 to 9 million to build the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Since then, the museum has amassed a magnificent world-class collection in its mission to serve the nation by welcoming all people to explore and experience art, creativity, and our shared humanity. My name is Eleanor Merle. I'm a docent with the Timken Museum. Please join me to explore masterpieces from the collection of the National Gallery of Art. Andrew William Mellon was an American banker, businessman, industrialist, philanthropist, art collector, and politician. The son of Mellon family patriarch Thomas Mellon, he established a vast business empire before moving into politics, serving as United States Secretary of the Treasury from 1921 to 1932. In his travels, he'd visited the National Gallery in London, and it was this museum that inspired him to donate his priceless art collection of 121 European masters and funding to build a museum for the American people to rival that in London. The National Gallery of Art officially opened on March 17, 1941, in the midst of World War II. The neoclassical building was designed by the architect John Russell Pope. It opened as national museums all over Europe were closing because of the increasingly catastrophic Second World War. But President Franklin D. Roosevelt only cited this as more reason to celebrate the legacy of culture. For Roosevelt, the gallery was a vehicle for democracy, a stepping stone toward building a society that prioritizes the common good. He especially emphasized the movement of the art from private and limited to public and democratic enjoyment. And I quote, "They belong so obviously to all who love them. They're so clearly the property not of their single owners, but of all men everywhere," quote, end of quote, he said about the gallery's paintings. We'll begin our tour with this somewhat modern Madonna and Child by the Sienese artist Lippo Memmi from about 1325. The painting's iconography is based on the type of the Hodegetria version. And if you've been to the museum, you've seen the Hodegetria in our icon gallery. It presents, however, a modernized version of this formula in keeping with the humanized faith and sensibility of the time. Instead of presenting her son to the observer as in the Byzantine model, Mary's right hand touches his breast, thus indicating him as the predestined sacrificial lamb. As if to confirm this destiny, the child draws his mother's hand towards him with his left hand. The gesture of his right hand outstretched and grasping the Madonna's veil can be interpreted as a further reference to his passion and death. The donor, an unidentified prelate, is seen kneeling to the left in the Madonna. His position suggests that the panel was intended as a pendant to a matching panel to the right, most likely a representation of the crucifixion. Lippo Memmi has given us here a portrait of a particular individual, unshaven, his ruddy skin slightly sagging below his tonsured curls, suggesting advanced age. He commissioned this painting and used it in his private devotions. Just about 100 years later, early Netherlandish artists were using oil paints to create remarkably detailed and realistic works, and none is more brilliant than Jan van Eyck's The Annunciation. We don't know who commissioned this work or where it was originally installed, but most likely it was the left-hand section of a three-part altarpiece whose other panels are now sadly lost. It's regarded as one of the most complex paintings, rich in symbolism and iconography, not to mention stylistic detail that makes it appear almost photographic. And while the church is fictitious, the details of the architecture have been associated with specific buildings, such as the Cathedral of Tournai or Notre Dame in Dijon. The Archangel Gabriel delivers a salutation from God. Hail, full of grace. His words flow out in gold letters. Mary draws back with surprise and modesty. She's been chosen to bear the Son of God. As she speaks her acceptance, "Behold the handmaiden of the Lord," written in reverse for God to see, the dove of the Holy Spirit descends to her on rays of light. For Christian believers, this is the very instant of the incarnation, when Word is made flesh and Jesus is given earthly life, and when God's plan for salvation is set in motion. It's a moment of abiding mystery that Jan van Eyck makes concrete. By recreating the material world with specificity and precision, he gives us a tangible sense that the painted world is continuous with our own, astonishing detail at the limits of human vision brings the Annunciation into the viewer's present. The setting of the scene within a church itself is significant and new. Van Eyck appears to have been the first panel painter to locate the Annunciation in a church. Both the ecclesiastical setting and the overlarge size of the Virgin within it help identify the church with the person of Mary. For all its highly convincing evocation of the material world, however, virtually every element in Van Eyck's painting carries levels of meaning. His elaborate symbolism, which would have been fully grasped only by a small, well-educated elite, centers on the implications of the Annunciation as the transition to the new era of grace brought about by Christ's human birth and sacrifice. The light that streams in from the window at the upper left takes the form of 7 golden rays. The dove of the Holy Spirit descends along the longest of these. The number 7 refers to the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit from the book of Isaiah. In addition to the divine light from above, a naturalistic light illuminates the scene from the right. The single stained glass window at the top of the back wall contains a depiction of the Lord and contrasts with the 3 lead-shot windows behind the Virgin, reinforcing the passage from the Jewish concept of one God to the Christian concept of the Trinity. That the figure of the Lord in the stained glass stands atop a globe may refer to his words in Isaiah 66, quote, "Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool," end of quote. Remember this because we'll have reason to reference it again. Both figures are elaborately dressed. Mother Mary wears a blue dress, symbolic of divinity, with ermine trim. Ermine, of course, was used for royal garments, which suggests Mother Mary's royalty. Archangel Gabriel wears a similarly styled robe to Mother Mary, except it's more lavish, decorated in patterns and jewels. He wears a crown and holds a staff in his left hand, with his right finger pointing upwards. His garments suggest he's taking part or he's celebrating Mass. The difference in clothing creates a contrast between the two figures, indicating that Archangel Gabriel is from heaven and Mother Mary appears more plain, suggestive of the contrast of heaven and earth. Interestingly, Mary's facial features are believed to resemble that of Isabella of Portugal. She was Philip the Good's wife, in whose court Van Eyck was employed. Gabriel's wings are depicted in a variety of colors, reminiscent of a rainbow. The rainbow becomes a powerful symbol of cleansing and purification, strong themes from biblical narratives. This is the only Annunciation theme where Jan van Eyck gave Gabriel rainbow wings that appeared in this manner. The wings also look like peacock feathers, which are symbolic of immortality. In the bottom right corner of the composition are a book, a bunch of lilies, and a footstool. The book is suggested to be the book of Isaiah, but it could also hint at Mary's studious nature. The lilies represent purity, and they're also symbols of Christ. And remember the single stained glass window behind Mary, in which God stands on a globe of the world, referring to the Bible verse in Isaiah, "Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool." The floor, which appears as tiles, depicts various scenes from the Old Testament, including stories of Samson and the story of David and Goliath. Notice the zodiac signs, which are a common addition on floors or pavements of medieval cathedrals like the one suggested here. They point to God's rule of the whole universe. including all things related to astrology, as well as suggesting chaos before the advent of Christ. Finally, a note on perspective. The figures appear larger in size than what would be mathematically in proportion to the surrounding architecture, possibly highlighting the figure's importance. Along with Jan van Eyck, Roger van der Weyden was the greatest painter working in the Low Countries in the 1400s. Little is known about his life. While a few of his paintings can be documented, not a single signed or dated work survives. Toward the end of his career, he created a number of elegant portraits for the Burgundian court, including this expressive work. We don't know the identity of the sitter, but her air of self-conscious dignity suggests that she's a member of the nobility. Her costume and severely plucked eyebrows and hairline are typical of those favored by highly placed ladies of the Burgundian court. Roger excelled as a portrait painter because he so vividly presented the character of the persons he portrayed. He was a master at evoking the most subtle feelings from his subjects, a skill that didn't become widely prized in portraiture until the later years of the Renaissance. The downcast eyes, the firmly set lips, and the tense fingers reflect this woman's mental concentration. Roger juxtaposed the strong sensation of the sitter's acute mental activity to his rigid control of the composition and the formality of her costume and pose, presenting the views with an image of passionate austerity, a woman who seems somewhat removed from the world. Our next work may remind you of Leonardo da Vinci's famous Mona Lisa, but the artist painted Ginevra de' Benci more than 20 years earlier. Her portrait, the only painting by Leonardo da Vinci in the Americas, was probably commissioned about the time of her marriage at age 16. Leonardo was about 22, and both were living in Florence. Ginevra was born in 1457 to a wealthy family. Her father was a politician, a merchant, and a banker, involved with the Medici and the Medici Bank. Her brother was close friends with Leonardo, which we know from letters left behind. She was said to be incredibly intelligent, cultured, and beautiful, educated in reading, writing, and arithmetic, Latin, and music. She was also a poet, and while none of her works remain, she had several poems dedicated to her by writers and poets, including Lorenzo de' Medici. The vast majority of female portraits, you may know, were commissioned on one of two occasions: betrothal, engagement, or marriage. Wedding portraits tend to be made in pairs, with the woman on the right side. Since Ginevra faces right, this portrait is more likely to have commemorated her engagement. Her lack of obvious finery, however, is somewhat surprising. Jewels, luxurious brocades, elaborate dresses were part of dowry exchanges and displayed a family's wealth. The portrait is among Leonardo's earliest experiments with the new medium of oil paint. The careful observation of nature and subtle three-dimensionality of Ginevra's face point unmistakably to the new naturalism which with Leonardo would transform Renaissance painting. She's modeled with gradually deepening veils of smoky shadow, not by line, and not by abrupt transitions of color or light. Other features of Ginevra's portrait reveal young Leonardo as an innovator. He placed her in an open setting at a time when women were still shown carefully sheltered within the walls of their family homes, with landscapes glimpsed only through open windows. And the three-quarter pose, which shows her steady reserve, is among the first in Italian portraiture for either sex. Ginevra's face is framed by the spiky evergreen leaves of a juniper bush. The once brighter green turned brown with age. Juniper refers to her chastity, the greatest virtue of a Renaissance woman, and it also puns her name, the Italian for juniper being ginepro. At some point in the past, probably because of damage, the panel was cut down by a few inches along the bottom, removing Ginevra's hands. A drawing by Leonardo survives that suggests their appearance, lightly cradled at her waist and holding a small sprig, perhaps a pink, a flower commonly used in Renaissance portraits to symbolize devotion or virtue. After Leonardo finished this portrait, someone asked him to create a painting on the reverse. This side is painted with symbols that describe her inner character, and it's called an emblematic portrait. So follow the scroll from the left side, where it wraps around a stalk of laurel, to the sprig of juniper in the center, and finally to its curl around the palm branch on the right. The laurel is meant to represent Ginevra's intelligence. The juniper, again, identifies her by name, and the palm branch symbolizes her strong moral values. We can certainly understand why this work is one of the most beloved in the National Gallery. Now, a bit of history here regarding our next work. In the decades leading up to the construction of the National Gallery, the United States was having a cultural identity crisis. City planners and government leaders grew bent on proving that America was more than just an industrial powerhouse, but a civilized, beautiful, and artistic society. This inspired the construction of museums, parks, monuments, and buildings that were supposed to make up for the centuries of Western cultural heritage that made Europe so special in the eyes of American elites. The Soviet Union was facing the opposite problem. In the early 1930s, the primary concern of the new government was industrializing a vast country that had fallen behind its European counterparts. The first 5-year economic plan called for capital, and selling the imperial treasures of the Hermitage Museum was a way to acquire the money. Though the sale of Hermitage art didn't last very long, it was enough time for Mellon to buy 21 valuable paintings, including works by Van Eyck, Botticelli, Titian, and Rembrandt. In 1931, Mellon bought the Alba Madonna by Raphael for $1,166,400, the largest sum ever paid for a painting until that time. After 4 years in Florence, the great Renaissance artist Raphael moved to Rome in 1508, probably to execute more significant commissions under the papal reign of Julius II. The major work in America from Raphael's Roman period is this work, the Alba Madonna. In this Madonna of humility, the Virgin is seated directly on the ground instead of on a heavenly throne or a sumptuous cushion. The artist grouped the figures in a broad, low period, aligning them within a circle in such a way that they not only conform to their space, but they dominate it as well. The tondo, or round format style, was popular in Florentine painting, and the influence of the Florentine masters Michelangelo and Leonardo is also apparent in the work. It shows the Roman style Raphael adapted in the painting's delicacy of color and mood, with figures draped in rose pink, pale blue, and green, set in an idealized classical landscape. The Madonna is dressed in an antique costume of turban, sandals, and flowing robes. The serene, bucolic atmosphere of Raphael's Tondo belies the emotional meaning. The Christ child's gesture of accepting the cross from John the Baptist is the focus of attention of all three figures, as if they have foreknowledge of Christ's sacrifice for mankind. Remaining in Italy, but moving north, we enter the private study of Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, and it's here we see the Feast of the Gods, which formed the key element in one of the finest domestic decorative schemes of the Italian Renaissance, the Duke's private study. Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, commissioned the two leading painters from Venice, first Giovanni Bellini and later his former pupil Titian, to depict bacchanals or revelries with mythological themes for the study. Begun by 1511, the room, this is a recreation, the room in the castle of Ferrara came to be called the Alabaster Chamber after its alabaster sculpture. Sadly, the actual space was destroyed. Appropriate to the classical theme of Olympian deities enjoying an outdoor banquet, Giovanni Bellini conceived the feast as an alignment of figures in a dignified frieze-like arrangement across the foreground. In the right corner, an oak bucket bears a parchment with Bellini's signature and the date 1514. As for the story, the beautiful nymph Lotus, shown reclining at the far right, was lulled to sleep by wine. Priapus, overcome by lust, seized the opportunity to take advantage of her and is portrayed bending forward to lift her skirt. His attempt was foiled when an ass, seen at the left, quote, with raucous braying, gave out an ill-timed roar. Awakened, the startled nymph pushed Priapus away, and the god was laughed at by all, end of quote. Priapus, his pride wounded, took revenge by demanding the annual sacrifice of a donkey. After Bellini's death in 1516, sadly, much of the background was altered by another painter, Dasso Dassi, a Ferrari's court artist. Bellini's original landscape, visible today only at the right side, consisted of a screen of trees. And then probably in 1529, after he'd contributed three of his own paintings to the Alabaster Chamber, Titian repainted the setting in the feast again, adding the dramatic mountain. The Duke may have directed the younger master to harmonize the repainted landscape with Titian's own more dynamic pictures. The evolution of the design reveals marked changes in taste between the serene art of Bellini, belonging to the 15th century, and the more vigorous style that Titian was developing in the 16th century. We do know, however, that at the figures are Bellini's original, all the figures are Bellini's original work. So moving ahead about a century and lost to the public until the late 19th, early 20th century, Judith Leister's works have become favorites with museum visitors. Her self-portrait exudes self-confidence in her abilities, and it's become one of the National Gallery of Art's most popular Dutch paintings. Leister has depicted herself at her easel, briefly interrupting work on a painting of a violin player to interact with the viewer. The momentary quality of the portrait and the vigorous brushwork echoed the work of Frans Hals, Haarlem's most celebrated portrait painter and Leister's colleague. This is, of course, our portrait at the Timken by Hals. By juxtaposing her hand holding a brush with the hand and bow of the violin player, Leister cleverly compares the art of creating ephemeral music with the art of creating timeless paintings. She holds the tools of her trade, a palette, a cloth, and no fewer than 18 brushes. In reality, she would not have worn the elegant dress and lace-trimmed collar while working in her studio. In the late 1640s, a city historian wrote that among the many women experienced in the field of painting, quote, one excels exceptionally, end of quote, calling her the true leading star in art. The compliment cleverly alludes to the artist's family name, which means lodestar, and the artist herself incorporated a star in her professional signature, the monogram JL. Let's now leave a woman painting and move on to a woman writing a letter as portrayed by Johan Vermeer. Vermeer was part of a large network of elite artists producing idealized images of daily life for the highest levels of the Dutch art market in the third quarter of the 17th century. The National Gallery has 3 of Vermeer's authenticated works from an oeuvre of only 35. In this exquisite painting, diffuse light softly illuminates the tabletop. The woman's face and her rich lemon yellow morning jacket, accents on the pearls decorating her jewelry box, her earrings, and her satin hair ribbons further enliven the image. The woman's open gaze engages the viewer, which suggests that the painting may be a portrait instead of a generalized portrayal of a young woman at her writing table. Many of the objects seen in the painting, such as the woman's coat, the cloth on the table, and the string of pearls, also appear in other Vermeer works. This has led to speculation that he or his family members own the objects, and even that the subjects of the paintings are his relatives. It's often been suggested that in his paintings, Vermeer sought to depict in his models that which he could not give to his wife and family, calm and affluence. Now, best known for meticulously crafted high-life genre paintings, Vermeer executed other subjects as well, including 3 bust-length paintings of imaginary figures, or what were called tronies. The Girl with a Red Hat is such a work, a tronie. This is an archaic term denoting a style of painting popularized by Rembrandt and his disciples. While most Dutch tronies use living models, these weren't crafted as formal portraits. Instead, they were prominently displayed in the artist's studio to entice potential buyers. So they were marketing pieces. Typical subjects for tronies encompassed elderly men, alluring young women, figures dressed as Turks or spirited soldiers. artists gravitated towards attire that seemed particularly foreign, granting them an avenue to flaunt their adept painting skills, a prominent mark of a proficient artist during that era. These paintings also functioned as a reservoir of diverse facial characteristics and emotions, later to be incorporated into historical artworks. We have a Trony by Rubens in the Dutch and Flemish gallery you may have seen. The painting is Vermeer's smallest extant work and the only one painted on panel. We don't really know why panel. It may have been because he wanted the smoothness of the panel to best help represent the art. And upon his death, other panels as surfaces for paintings were found in his studio. The artist's exquisite use of color, however, is the painting's most striking characteristic. The composition depicts a young woman staring out at the viewer from beneath a broad, feathery, cherry red beret. Dressed in a lush blue robe with hints of patterning, the woman seems to radiate energy, a feeling that stems as much from the vibrant color combinations as from the intensity of her gaze. The painting is intimate, immediate, and daring in both its conception and execution. Let's now move outdoors and take a look at the luscious countryside populated by lovers involved in romance and flirtation. And that means we're in the Rococo period in France and Jean-Honoré Fragonard. Along with his teacher, Francois Boucher, Fragonard is regarded as the leading painter of the light-hearted French Rococo style that characterized the reigns of King Louis XV and his grandson, Louis XVI. This monumental canvases of Blind Man's Buff and The Spring, which must be counted among the greatest achievements in 18th century French landscape painting, have been associated, the two of them, since their rediscovery in the early 19th century. Nearly identical in height, they present similar views of vast and fecund picturesque gardens, peopled with elegantly dressed men, women, and children, playing games, conversing, promenading, and dining in an exuberant natural environment. The myriad details in each, bubbling fountains, shadowy sculptures, overgrown flower beds, rushing cascades, soaring trees, and towering cloud-filled skies, pull the viewer's eye in constant motion, in, around, and between the two compositions. Blind Man's Buff was intended to hang to the left of the swing. When seen side by side, the paintings can be appreciated as one panoramic composition, centered on a great mound surmounted by a geyser and flanked by dramatic vistas to either side. The grand scale and broad, freely handled technique suggests that the paintings were conceived as decorations to be installed into the paneling on the wall of a salon. As with so many of Fragonard's oeuvre, the early history of these resplendent landscapes is unknown, yet they surely must have been one of the artist's most important commissions. Nearly all Fragonard's depictions of such pastimes take place in the kind of fecund and overgrown picturesque garden that was increasingly popular with the aristocracy at the end of the Ancien regime. Although Fragonard sometimes drew and painted actual gardens, his depictions are more often imaginative recreations of the private retreats enjoyed by his well-heeled patrons and their intimates. Fragonard did 5 versions of Blind Man's Buff, and the Timken is privileged to have a late easel version. You see here the Timken work to the right of the earlier National Gallery version. Immediately apparent is the lighter pastel coloring and focus on the figures participating in the game. These figures seem to be gazing at something beyond the canvas. Indeed, this painting is probably a fragment of a considerably larger work done between 1776 and 1780. Its subject was likely also Blind Man's Buff. A game in progress on the missing left side would explain the rapt attention of these elegant ladies and gentlemen. Now, in the game, a blindfolded player attempts to capture his or her companions. Here, beneath the pink parasol, a young man is being blindfolded by several young, eager ladies. Perhaps he's about to, perhaps about to join in. Above them, in a large fountain, a sculptured goddess extends an arm as if to bless this delightful activity. Despite the overall playfulness of the picture, the gray sky and fluttering leaves suggest wind rising before a storm. Together with the overturned planter in the foreground, these may be metaphors for the moment of sadness and misunderstanding that accompany pursuits of love. Now, we all know what happens in France at the end of the 18th century, the French Revolution, and Fragonard's garden scenes came to be derided as outdated and frivolous. Manet came on scene and broke all traditions with his more modern portrayals of life. Around him, as seen in the National Gallery's The Railway, one of Manet's most important and ravishing paintings. It's dominated by 2 figures. One, the little girl, was reportedly the daughter of Manet's neighbor, Alphonse Hirsch. The other was Victorine Morin, the woman who posed for Manet's most sensational pictures, Déjeuner sur l'Herbe and Olympia, or at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. They're pictured in the garden behind Hirsch's apartment house, at the edge of which was a tall iron gate. Behind them are railroad tracks leading to the Gare Saint-Lazare, then the largest train station in Paris. The station is suggested by the cloud of steam at center and the signalman's hut. On the left is the facade and entryway of Manet's studio. These strategies challenged the usual ways a picture was understood in 1874. Manet offered, instead, a pictorial encounter with immediacy, a momentary glimpse of a child turned away, a train not seen, a woman whose look is direct but impenetrable, and at a distance, the artist's studio door. But just the next year, in 1874, a group of artists, calling themselves and translated the Anonymous Association of Artists, Painters, Sculptors, Engravers, etc., opened an exhibition independent of the official salon. Remember, the official salon, the arbiter of art, was still in force. Conspicuously absent from this alternative exhibition was Edouard Manet, recognized leader of the avant-garde. Though he never participated in any of their 8 exhibitions, Manet's bold style and modern subjects inspired these younger artists who came to be known as Impressionists. One commentator on the 1874 exhibition noted, quote, They're impressionists in the sense that they render not the landscape, but the sensation produced by the landscape, end of quote. Artists like Monet wanted to paint not simply what they saw, but the way they saw it. And here is Claude Monet's Woman with a Parasol. It was actually with Monet's assistance that Monet found lodging in suburban Argenteuil in late 1871, a move that initiated one of the most fertile phases of his career. Impressionism evolved in the late 1860s from a desire to create full-scale, multi-figure depictions of ordinary people in casual outdoor situations. At its purest, Impressionism was attuned to landscape painting, a subject Monet favored, but in Woman with a Parasol, Madame Monet and her son, his skill as a figure painter is equally evident. Contrary to the artificial conversations or conventions of academic portraiture, Monet delineated the features of his sitters as freely as their surroundings. The spontaneity and naturalness of the resulting image were praised when it appeared in the Second Impressionist exhibition in 1876. The work was painted outdoors, probably in a single session of several hours' duration. The artist intended it to convey the feeling of a casual family outing rather than a formal portrait, and used pose and placement to suggest that his wife and son interrupted their stroll while he captured their likenesses. The brevity of the moment portrayed here is conveyed by a repertory of animated brushstrokes of vibrant color, hallmarks of the style Monet was instrumental in forming. Bright sunlight shines from behind Camille to whiten the top of her parasol and the flowing cloth at her back, while colored reflections from the wildflowers touch the front of her skirt below. Another exhibitor at this first Impressionist exhibition was Auguste Renoir, who submitted 7 paintings. Among them was The Dancer. In contrast to works by most of the other artists in the group, Renoir's paintings were relatively well received. The Dancer in particular was singled out for attention. While some dismissed it as being little more than a sketch, lacking in good draftsmanship, and the same criticism leveled at many of the works on display, others found it graceful and charming, praising its realism and originality of conception. Both the painting's scale and the figure's prominence placed in the very center of the composition, she dominates the entire canvas, hark back to traditional portraits, lending this work a gravity somewhat at odds with the painting's modern subject. Shown in profile, her silk slippered feet placed in classic 5th position, Renoir's Dancer is poised and alert as she turns her gaze toward the viewer. Renoir accentuated the dancer's youth, highlighting the roundness of her face, the still boyish flatness of her chest, even the way the fingers of her left hand appear to toy nervously with the tulle of her skirt. Although Renoir himself never identified the figure, the model is almost certainly Henriette Henriot, the young actress who posed regularly for the artist in the mid-1870s. Renoir skillfully transformed his model's appearance, depicting her with equal verve as both a sweet-faced adolescent on the verge of adulthood and a fashionable performer. Ultimately, however, Renoir's virtuoso brushwork is the painting's most compelling feature. His paint handling is varied, ranging from the delicate brushstrokes that define the dancer's face to the loose, almost careless application of paint in the picture's background. The dancer's skirt is a tour de force. Renoir masterfully captured the gauzy softness of the tulle. It floats about her body like a cloud, seeming to dissolve into the hazy background, the fabric as light and insubstantial as mist. Those of you familiar with Renoir's work know that it seems always to be about pleasurable occasions and reveals no great seriousness in the subjects. He apparently shocked his teacher by saying, quote, "If painting were not a pleasure to me, I should certainly not do it." Says it all. Mary Cassatt was the only American to join the French Impressionists, first exhibiting with the group at Degas' invitation in 1879, and she quickly emerged as a key member of the movement. Alongside scenes of women at the opera, visiting friends, taking tea, Cassatt produced many images of women's work, knitting and needlepoint, bathing children, and nursing. By the turn of the century, Cassatt was working almost exclusively with the subject of mothers and children, using professional models for her figures. In this painting, this is woman with a sunflower. She looks closely at an interaction between women at different stages of life. The mother's fashionable outfit serves as a foil for the child's innocent nudity, and the two figures are unified by their gestures and gazes. By including two mirrors within the composition, Cassatt established a complex spatial and conceptual arrangement of images within images. Artists from Diego Velázquez and Peter Paul Rubens to Edouard Manet had depicted women looking at themselves in mirrors, seeing themselves as objects of beauty to be admired by others. Cassatt was aware of this tradition in Western art, but she subverted it in this work. Here, the woman and the girl both look into the small circular mirror where they regard the child's reflection together. In this enigmatic work, the true subjects then become the young girl's evolving feminine identity and her future womanhood under the guidance of maternal influence. But now let's briefly take a deeper dive, and consider the sunflower. Much of the research on this topic was done by Nikki Georgiopoulos, who was a doctoral candidate in 2018 when she delved into this image in the painting. She became captivated by the sunflower, a radiant focal point in Cassatt's composition. While scholars before her had dismissed it as merely a pretty decoration, her research revealed that it bore a powerful political message. The sunflower had been the official symbol of the National American Women's Suffrage Association since 1896. By the time Cassatt painted Woman with a Sunflower around 1905, they'd appeared on all kinds of official and promotional suffrage materials, such as button emblazoned with the phrase, "We want to vote for president" in 1904, now in the collection of the Museum of the City of New York. That Cassatt would so prominently display a symbol of the suffrage movement in her painting comes really as no surprise. A fierce advocate for women's rights, she was unafraid of using her work to advance the cause. Woman with a Sunflower was among the 20 or so of her paintings included in a 1915 exhibition to raise money for the suffrage campaign. Post-Impressionist artists sought to move beyond the limitations of Impressionism, no longer satisfied to transcribe primarily visual effects, and they use color and form in a more abstract and subjective way. Like many artists in the 1880s, they looked for ways to express meaning beyond surface appearance, to paint with the emotion and intellect as well as the eye. And this is where we find Vincent van Gogh, in his famous work and this memorizing portrait of Le Musée. Van Gogh found inspiration for this portrait in the bold complementary colors and contrasting patterns of the Japanese woodblock prints he collected. He fantasized about Japan as a utopia of bright light and color, different from the dark, crowded Western capitals he lived in. In a letter to his brother, Theo, he described how this painting consumed his attention. Quote, "It took me a whole week, but I had to reserve my mental energy to do the Musée well." The name, he explained, came from a character in a popular novel set in Japan. A Musée is a Japanese girl, Provençal in this case, 12 to 14 years old. The girl's costume is a contrast of patterns and complementary shades of blue and orange. The paint in these bold stripes and irregular dots stands out against the pale green lattice of vertical and horizontal brushstrokes in the background. The vigorous patterns express Van Gogh's sympathetic response to his young sitter, whose face is carefully modeled and finished to a greater degree than other parts of the picture. Compare her hands, for example, which are more sketchily painted. And of his use of color, he wrote, quote, "Instead of trying to reproduce exactly what I have before my eyes, I use color more arbitrarily in order to express myself more forcefully." La Musée is one of a series of portraits Van Gogh painted while living in Arles. They were, he wrote, "the only thing in painting that excites me to the depths of my soul, and which made me feel the infinite more than anything else." End of quote. The flowering branch the girl holds is probably related to Van Gogh's pantheistic faith in the power of nature's cycles of life and renewal. We'll close today's tour with a work by the renowned portraitist of the Gilded Age, John Singer Sargent. Sargent's inordinate technical facility, coupled with his ability to portray elegant sitters in sumptuous surroundings, made him extremely popular with wealthy patrons on both sides of the Atlantic. But by 1909, he'd become exasperated by the whims and vanities of prominent sitters, and he abandoned conventional portraiture in order to, quote, "experiment with more imaginary fields." And here's a wonderful example of his late work, Non Chalois. Non Chalois, or Repose, was painted in 1911, and it's a masterpiece of his genre paintings. It explores a poetic moment of aristocratic silence, depicting a woman reclining on a love seat during an afternoon nap. Above her is the bottom edge of a large gilt framed painting. The unseen painting implies the huge cavernous room surrounding this small, silent scene. John Singer Sargent intentionally zooms in and crops the perspective to allow the viewer to focus on the woman's delicate beauty. Her image is not a formal standing portrait, but an informal figure study, a loving snapshot of domestic tranquility. The woman, however, depicted in the painting is Sargent's 18-year-old niece, Rose Marie Ormond, the daughter of his sister, Violet Sargent Ormond. Rose Marie was a favorite of Sargent because she was not only a beloved niece, but because she had an energetic and strong character that Sargent found charming. He produced this work while visiting his sister's family in Switzerland. Sargent originally titled the painting Nonchalance, but he changed it to Nonchalois when he submitted it at a exhibition in London. Some scholars believe that the title was changed because Nonchalois plays upon châle, the modern French word for a shawl, an appropriate wordplay as Rosemarie's patterned shawl dominates the background. While wearing a shawl as a fashion item was no longer trending, it still signified the scene's lingering gentility and elegant indulgence. It hints at an Edwardian world demarcated by heritage, wealth, and refinement, soon to be shattered in 1914 by World War I. This wraps up a rather, I apologize. It's a whirlwind tour, but it was a bit long. I hope you found it somewhat inspiring and interesting. I could only show you, a smidgen of the 150,000 works in the collection. And I hope it's whet your appetite to visit in person, because only then can you truly experience this national treasure whose holdings continue to inspire and capture us today. I do welcome any questions. I know it's late, and I thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. That was such a great tour. It was just incredible to see the collection in the National Gallery. And it looks like we do have a couple questions. We have Ryan asking, what is your favorite work in the National Gallery?
I have been there several times. It is almost impossible to know. I will tell you, we've been focusing on the West Gallery, which are the older works, and it has a it's not new anymore, the East Wing, which has the newer works. And those are also wonderful. Whistler's Mother, I'm sorry, not Whistler's Mother, but many of the more modern works are there. I would say this Ginevra da Benci work, I mean, it's the only Leonardo work in the Americas, so you do not have to go see the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. You only need to go see her.
Very nice. Any other questions from anyone else? All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you everyone for joining us today. And just a reminder, if you'd like to watch this lecture back or any of our previous lectures, those are always available to watch on our Facebook page, Timken Museum of Art. So thank you again, Eleanor, for the great tour.
Welcome.
We'll see everyone next time. Have a nice day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.